The letter shook in her hand. Nora hadn't meant to open it, not after 5 years. Not on a morning that already felt too heavy. But there it was, trembling between her fingers like a truth that had waited too long. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the slow rise of steam from a cup of tea she hadn't yet touched. Early winter sunlight slipped through the blinds, falling in thin, cold stripes across her table, across the envelope, across the life she'd built around avoiding this moment. She told herself she had moved on, new job, new routines, new strength, but even strength has a crack or two, and hers widened the moment she saw his name again. Because the man she once ran from, the man she ghosted after a single night that changed far more than she ever admitted, was back in her life. Not with anger, not with questions, but as her new CEO. And in the quiet of that kitchen, with the letter she never gave him finally open, Nora realized something she had spent years refusing to face. Some pasts don't stay buried, not when they were never truly gone. If you've ever held on to something long enough for it to bruise you, this story may feel familiar. Let's begin. Nora stopped the moment the glass door swung shut behind her. The conference room stretched long and bright under the morning lights, but all she saw was the man at the head of the table. Grant Whitmore. 5 years older than when she last saw him, a little broader around the shoulders. His hair touched with more gray, but unmistakably him. The man she had left before sunrise in a Boston hotel room. The man she had not spoken to since. And now, somehow, impossibly, he was her new CEO. Her hand tightened around the notebook she carried. She felt the edges dig into her palm, steadying her breath. The room hummed with quiet chatter among department heads, the usual shuffle of laptops and paper, but everything inside her went strangely still. Grant looked up from the agenda packet, his gaze sweeping the room with practiced calm until it reached her. His eyes froze, and a flicker of recognition crossed his face, followed by something she couldn't read. Surprise disappointment. A judgment he'd been waiting years to deliver. Nora forced her feet to move, though each step felt uncertain. She took a seat 3 chairs from the door. The polished table reflected the overhead lights sharply, enough that she could see the tremble in her fingers when she uncapped her pen. She tucked her hand beneath her notebook, as if hiding a secret. The HR director cleared her throat, smiling too widely for a Monday morning. Everyone, as you know, today is our first leadership meeting with Grant Whitmore. Grant comes to us with 20 years of experience in strategy and publishing innovation. We're thrilled he's joining us. A polite round of applause rose. Grant stood, buttoning his suit jacket with the same steady confidence she remembered. Years ago, he'd walked beside her through a Boston street covered in fresh snow, with that same easy composure, steady, warm, grounding. She looked down now, unwilling to meet his eyes again. "Thank you," Grant said. His voice had deepened, or maybe it only felt deeper because hearing it again brought back memories she had worked hard to bury. "I'm looking forward to getting to know everyone and understanding where we can grow." He spoke about goals, market shifts, and the future of the company. His tone was clear, concise, professional, but every so often, she felt his gaze slide toward her. It was quick, fleeting, but enough to unsettle her pulse. When it was her turn to present the quarterly editorial overview, her voice wouldn't settle. She cleared her throat once, then again, but the words still wavered. She tried focusing on the screen, on the bullet points she had reviewed just this morning, but the room felt too warm, the air too thin. Grant's attention, unwavering, made her feel exposed in a way she hadn't expected. She stumbled over a statistic. Sorry, the number should be." "You're fine," Grant said quietly, but the softness in his tone made her throat tighten rather than soothe her. She pushed through the rest of the report, steadying her breath with each slide. When she finished, she sat quickly, trying to compose herself. The room continued without missing a beat, but Nora knew she hadn't hidden her unease well. She could feel the flush along her neck, that creeping embarrassment she loathed. The meeting carried on budget concerns, author contracts, a new distribution initiative, but Nora heard very little. Her attention drifted again and again to the curve of Grant's expression, calm, unreadable, but never fully relaxed. He was too aware of her, and she hated that she didn't know what that meant. By the time they reached departmental assignments, her chest felt tight. She waited for her name, hoping only to leave the room unnoticed. She had survived the morning. That was all she wanted. "Before we wrap," Grant said, glancing at the agenda, "I want to reassign oversight on the Whitfield memoir launch." Nora's heart stiffened. That project was weeks away from print. Any changes now meant long nights, tough conversations, and pressure she didn't feel ready for. "I want Nora Carter to take lead," Grant continued. She blinked. Her throat went dry. The room quieted for a moment, just enough for her pulse to thud in her ears. Grant didn't look at her this time. He simply wrote something in his notes, as if the decision had nothing to do with 5 years of silence between them, as if it were purely work. The HR director nodded. "That's a major project. Are you sure you want to shift it now?" "Yes," Grant said, calm and certain. "Nora's the best fit, and I'll be overseeing it directly." Nora's grip tightened on her pen. The words echoed overseeing it directly. A chill ran along her spine, subtle but sharp. She forced herself to keep her expression neutral as the meeting continued. But part of her was spiraling. Had he reassigned the project because he trusted her talent, or because he wanted her close enough to demand answers she hadn't been brave enough to give 5 years ago, when the room began to empty? She stayed seated, hoping to collect herself, but she felt his presence before she looked up. Grant stood near the end of the table, hands in his pockets, watching her quietly. His expression held no anger, but no warmth either, just something measured, waiting. And all she could think was whether he had meant this as punishment, or if he wanted her exactly where she couldn't run this time. The question lingered like a weight on her chest as she finally rose from her chair, unsure what she feared more, that he resented her, or that he remembered everything. The memory always returned in fragments, soft, snow-lit pieces that felt both warm and unbearably distant. It should have been the beginning of something beautiful, but fear had a way of bending a woman's choices, turning hope into something she couldn't touch. Nora remembered the cold Boston air more clearly than anything else, how it stung her cheeks the night she met Grant Whitmore for the first time. She had arrived for a 3-day conference, still wearing the heaviness of a divorce finalized only 6 months before. 36 then, exhausted in a way no one could see. She had spent the flight rereading legal emails just to remind herself that the marriage really was over. Her ex-husband hadn't been cruel in a visible way. The cruelty had been quieter. Years of speaking over her, dismissing her thoughts, forgetting birthdays, forgetting dinners, forgetting her. She had left the marriage carrying the kind of emptiness that didn't go away when the papers were signed. Boston greeted her with snow flurries drifting like delicate ash. The hotel lobby was warm, busy, full of voices rising and falling, and she remembered feeling painfully alone among them. She had been checking in when the man behind her apologized for bumping her suitcase. His voice was warm, textured something steady in it. "Sorry, didn't see it there," he'd said with a small laugh. She turned, and there he was, Grant. Though she hadn't known his name then, just a tall man with kind eyes and a worn leather briefcase, the kind that told stories of long flights and years of work. He wore no wedding ring. She noticed that immediately, though she pretended she hadn't. They ended up next to each other again later that afternoon, at a networking reception, her holding a plastic cup of Merlot. She barely sipped, him holding a soda water because he said he'd had too much coffee already. He introduced himself, and she managed to smile back. Their conversation began with the easy things, books, deadlines, the chaos of editing schedules, but somehow, without trying, it drifted into gentler, more dangerous territory growing older, losing pieces of oneself in long relationships, wondering if the second half of life could look different from the first. Grant spoke candidly, without pretense. "I think people deserve more than they let themselves believe," he'd said, and she wasn't sure how he made such a simple statement feel like an invitation. Later that night, when the conference ended and the bar downstairs emptied. They found themselves walking outside under a sky that glowed softly with city lights reflecting off fresh snow. Their breaths curled into the air, rising and fading. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that made it easy to tell the truth if she'd had any left in her. They walked slowly, more from reluctance than cold. He asked her if she was happy in Chicago. She said she didn't know anymore. He said he understood, and she somehow believed him. They talked about aging parents, stalled dreams, the strange loneliness of hotel rooms after corporate events. It felt like they had known each other much longer than a few hours. When she slipped on a patch of ice, he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. His touch was gentle, instinctive, and her heart reacted before her mind could. She felt a warmth she hadn't felt in years, a warmth she wasn't sure she trusted. They ended up back at the hotel, not rushing, not pretending it was casual. It felt natural to sit beside him in the quiet lounge, to talk until the fireplace embers dimmed, to watch him listen to her like every word mattered. And when they finally went upstairs, nothing about it was hurried. It felt almost too tender, too full, like something she wasn't ready to deserve. She remembered how he'd brushed a strand of hair behind her ear with a reverence she didn't know what to do with. He kissed her like he was afraid of hurting her, and that gentleness undid something deep inside her. But dawn came too quickly. Nora woke before he did. Her heart beat loud in the quiet room. The light coming through the curtains was pale and cold. Grant lay asleep beside her, one arm draped loosely across the sheets, his face softened by sleep. She watched him for a long moment and felt an ache she couldn't name. Something inside her whispered that she should stay, that this could be the start of a life she had never let herself imagine. But fear pressed harder. What if she fell in love and lost herself again? What if she disappointed him? What if she wasn't enough for a man who seemed to know who he was? What if she was only running from loneliness, not running towards something real? The answers didn't matter. Fear answered for her. She got dressed quietly, hands trembling as she buttoned her coat. On the desk sat hotel stationery. She picked up a pen, intending to write a simple thank you, but what came out instead was a single line she could barely acknowledge later. "You were kind when I needed kindness most." She folded the note, but couldn't bring herself to leave it. Instead, she slipped it into her bag and placed a small dried flower pressed between the pages of her travel journal on the pillow beside him. It wasn't a message, it wasn't an apology, it was all she could manage. Then she left before the sun fully rose, her footsteps muffled by hallway carpet, her breath uneven as she stepped into the cold morning alone. Grant would wake to find her gone, the room too quiet, the flower the only proof she had ever been there. The memory of that moment clung to her even now years later, like a question she had never found the courage to answer. Why couldn't she stay that morning? Grant asked for a private word, and the moment the door clicked shut behind them, the silence settled like a weight. Nora stood just inside his office, unsure whether to step forward or stay near the door as if ready to escape. The room felt colder than the hallway, though the soft hum of the heating vents suggested otherwise. He walked to his desk, not in a hurry, not dragging his feet either, but with that controlled calm she remembered too well. "Take a seat," he said. His voice was polite, even gentle, but it didn't ease the tightness in her chest. Nora sat across from him, her notebook still in hand, though she knew she wouldn't be taking notes. Grant leaned back slightly, and the faint reflection of the Chicago skyline shimmered in the office window behind him. Late afternoon light angled across the room, setting a muted glow on the edges of his face. For a heartbeat, she felt as if he belonged to some other chapter of her life, a chapter she had closed halfway and left unfinished. He clasped his hands, rested them on the desk, and studied her quietly. That stare made her inhale sharply. "You left without a goodbye." She had expected he would say something about the project, the meeting, her shaky presentation, anything work-related, but not that, not so directly. The words hung in the air, heavier than she was prepared for. Nora lowered her gaze to the grain of the wooden desk. It was complicated, she managed, though the words felt thin. There were deadlines. I had a flight to catch. I wasn't thinking clearly. A lie? Or at least only a sliver of the truth. She knew he could hear the hollowness in it. Grant didn't respond right away. He leaned forward just slightly, elbows on the desk, fingers interlocked. "You weren't thinking clearly," he repeated softly, not mockingly, just tired. For 5 years. I tried to understand what that meant. Her breath caught. She felt the heat rise to her face, the same heat she'd felt that morning in the conference room. She forced herself to hold steady, though her hands stayed clenched in her lap. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she whispered. "Maybe not," he said, "but you did." His tone wasn't angry. That hurt more than if he had raised his voice. There was a calm sadness in his eyes, a disappointment that made her feel smaller than she wanted to be. He didn't press for an explanation, didn't demand honesty, but that restraint made it harder to breathe. She wished he'd accuse her of something, anything, because then she could defend herself. But how did one defend fear? She risked a glance at him. He sat tall, composed, but there was tension at the corner of his jaw, a muscle that twitched once before settling. The office lights reflected in the window behind him, a double image, him in the present and the ghost of who he had been 5 years ago. "I'm sorry," she said again, uselessly. Grant looked away, just for a second. That was somehow worse than if he had stared her down. He stood from his chair and walked to the window, hands slipping into his pockets. From behind him, she could see only the outline of his shoulders, broad and steady, the way they had felt beneath her fingertips once. The city stretched out below, cars moving along the streets in slow lines, as if the world outside wasn't holding its breath the way she was. He spoke without turning around. "I don't want the past to interfere with your work here." The words stung in a different way, sharp and professional. She swallowed. "It won't," she said. "Good." He finally faced her again. His expression was calmer now, but not softer. "Because I need you to take point on the Whitfield contract." Her stomach dropped. The Whitfield memoir. She hesitated. "That's a high-profile author, high stakes, and the timeline is tight. That's why I want you on it." He walked back to his desk, picked up a folder, and set it in front of her. "You're capable. More than capable." The compliment should have steadied her. Instead, it unsettled her further, because she didn't know if he meant it as recognition or obligation. She opened the folder, skimming the first page to give her hands something to do. "All right," she said, hearing the quiet tremor she'd hoped to hide. "I'll start reviewing it tonight." His gaze lingered on her face, and she felt it like a warmth she didn't deserve. "I'll be overseeing the project directly," he added. The words settled uneasily. She lifted her eyes but couldn't read his expression. She wanted to ask why. She wanted to tell him she wasn't running this time. She wanted to explain the wounds she carried from a marriage that had stripped her confidence, the shame she still held too tightly, the fear she never learned to outgrow. But none of that made it to her lips. Grant's voice softened, though only slightly. "Can you handle working with me closely?" The question wasn't about workload. They both knew it. Nora nodded, though her heart beat harder than she wanted it to. "Yes," she said. "I can." "Good," he replied, but something unreadable flickered in his eyes. He dismissed her with a polite nod, nothing more. And she rose from her chair slowly, feeling the weight of invisible questions pressing between them. At the door, she hesitated a single moment, a quiet breath. She thought of the snow in Boston, the warmth of his hand steadying hers, the dawn she ran from. She wanted to turn back, to ask him what he really wanted from her now. Professionalism, distance, or something closer to the truth neither of them had said yet, but she didn't turn. She stepped into the hallway, the door closing softly behind her, carrying with her a question she wasn't ready to face. Did he give her the project because he trusted her judgment, or because he wasn't done with the conversation she'd avoided for 5 years? Every time Nora looked up from the manuscript, he was already watching her, not openly, not in a way she could call out, but in the subtle, unsettling way people watch something they don't fully trust or can't fully let go of. It happened on the second day of working together, when the Whitfield memoir seemed to grow heavier with every page and the office lights felt too bright for how tired she already was. Grant kept his door open as they worked, moving between her desk and a small round table near the window where he spread out annotated pages. The soft tap of his shoes across the carpet made her shoulders tense each time he approached. She tried not to notice, tried to keep her eyes glued to the manuscript, but the awareness of him lingered like a shadow. He was meticulous, painfully so. She had known that about him years ago, but it felt sharper now, more guarded. He reviewed each chapter with a precision that left no room for error. He asked questions in a calm, clipped tone. He pointed out inconsistencies with a quiet firmness that made her feel 12 years old instead of 41. "You missed a hyphen on page 93, he said once, standing behind her chair. She pressed lips together. "I'll fix it." And the date reference on page 98 that needs verification with the author's assistant. "I'll handle it." He made a small sound, like acknowledgement but not satisfaction, and walked away again. It was a minor error. Anyone could have overlooked it. But his comment stuck to her ribs. She felt heat rise under her collar and forced it down, reminding herself that he was her boss now. This was work. It meant nothing more. Late in the afternoon, she dropped a sticky note from her stack. When she bent to pick it up, it slipped beneath the desk. She reached for it, only to hit her head on the drawer above. "You all right?" Grant asked from behind her. His voice startled her. She straightened too fast, brushing her hair back in a quick, embarrassed motion. "I'm fine." He studied her carefully, as if checking for something deeper than a bump. That look made her turn away. "I'll have the chapter edits ready tonight," she said, hoping to shift the moment. "Good," he replied, but his tone carried something unspoken, and she couldn't decide if it felt like distance or concern. When she brought the updated pages to the conference room, later, she paused outside the half-open door. Grant was inside speaking to a senior executive, Martin Green. Their voices carried low, but not enough to hide the tension. She missed a detail earlier. Martin said, "If she's not a good fit, I can reassign no." Grant interrupted, sharper than she'd heard all week. "She's the right editor for this project. But that's final." Silence followed. Nora felt her breath catch. She stepped back from the doorway, pretending she hadn't heard anything, but the words echoed inside her chest with a mix of relief and confusion. If he was disappointed in her, why defend her? If he was protecting her, why correct her so sharply in private? The contradiction rattled her. She returned to her desk and worked through the evening, long after most people left. The office grew quieter. The overhead lights dimmed slightly as the building went into its nighttime mode. Computer screens glowed in soft blue halos, casting reflections across the floor. At one point, she felt his presence again, the subtle shift in air, the faint sound of his footsteps. Grant approached from behind, and she sat a little straighter without meaning to. "You've been here a while," he said, "just trying to get ahead." She answered, not turning around. His shadow slipped across her desk as he leaned over to look at her notes. The warmth of him so close made her inhale too quietly, too carefully. She hoped he didn't notice. "You reorganized the structure," he said. "Yes." The pacing felt uneven, so I shifted the final 2 chapters. He didn't respond, and she felt something tighten in her stomach. She braced herself for criticism. Then he said, softly, "Good call." The unexpected praise loosened her in a way she didn't want. Her hand trembled slightly as she made a note in the margin, and she prayed the motion went unnoticed. But he saw everything. He always had. "Nora," he said, his voice lower now, quieter. "Are you afraid of me?" Her breath halted. She turned slowly to meet his gaze. There was no accusation in his eyes, no anger, just a steady sadness, the kind that came from years of unanswered questions. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, though her voice wavered more than she wanted it to. "I'm just trying to keep things professional." "You think I don't want professionalism?" he asked gently. "I think you want something," she replied, "but I don't know what it is." Grant exhaled, a long, silent breath. His eyes held hers, searching, weighing, almost as if he were trying to read a chapter she hadn't written yet. Her heart beat harder. Her palms felt damp. He shifted slightly, stepping back, though only by a few inches, enough to give her air, not enough to ease the tension. "We'll keep working," he said quietly. "We'll figure things out." He turned toward his office, but paused at the doorway, his hand resting against the frame. She could see the outline of his shoulders against the soft glow of the city lights outside, his reflection merging with the dark window. "Nora," he said without looking back, "what do you think happened between us?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her voice stayed locked behind the same fear that had pulled her out of that Boston hotel room before sunrise. He waited a moment longer, then walked away, leaving her alone with a question that pressed against her ribs long after the lights dimmed. What did he think happened between them, and what truth was she still too afraid to say? The sound of her ex-husband's name in an email undid 5 years of progress. Nora stood in the middle of her small kitchen, the glow of the screen reflecting against the tiled backsplash. At first she thought she had misread it, that her tired eyes were playing tricks on her after too many hours spent combing through draft pages. But no, the name was there, bold and unmistakable, sitting at the top of a message titled "Final Review Regarding Property Settlement." Her fingers tightened around her phone until her knuckles paled. She set it on the counter too quickly, as if the device were something hot that could burn her. The house fell silent around her. The refrigerator hummed a quiet, steady sound. Outside, traffic whispered along the street below, but none of it grounded her. Her breath came shallow, too fast. She reached for the edge of the counter, steadying herself. She thought she was done with this. She had signed all the papers years ago. She had boxed up the memories, taped them shut, shoved them onto a shelf in her mind she never dared to touch. But now, a single unexpected email had cracked the lid open. Her kettle beeped softly, pulling her attention toward the stove. She had forgotten she'd made tea. She poured it into a mug, the steam rising in gentle ribbons. But the scent of chamomile didn't soothe her the way it usually did. She carried it to the table and sat down slowly, her hands trembling as she placed the cup on the wood. She tried reading the email again, but the words blurred. Something about a storage unit they never finalized. An old financial form that needed a second signature. It wasn't urgent, it wasn't personal, but it was enough. A sharp ache rose in her chest, old and familiar. Her mind lurched back to the years she had spent with him, years marked not by shouting or cruelty, but by something quieter, more eroding. Dinner conversations where he talked over her until she gave up speaking. Plans they made together only to be dismissed the next morning because he'd thought better of it. The way he forgot her birthday twice and brushed off her hurt with a shrug. The way she'd slowly learned to make herself smaller in order to keep the peace. Those memories pressed against her ribs now, a weight she had thought she'd outgrown. She picked up her mug, only to realize the tea had already cooled. She stared at it, her thumb tracing the rim in slow circles. She remembered a night near the end of her marriage, standing in this same kitchen, holding a cup just like this, feeling just as invisible. She remembered thinking, I can't keep living like this. The disappointment of that thought, the quiet shame of admitting how long she had stayed. A tear slipped down her cheek before she noticed it. She brushed it away, but more followed, slipping free with a soft, steady persistence. She didn't sob, she didn't gasp, she just cried in the way exhausted people cry silently, as if the body had decided it couldn't hold everything anymore. Grant didn't know any of this. He didn't know she had come to Boston half broken, didn't know why she fled. Didn't know she had once stood in a kitchen not unlike this one, convincing herself she deserved so little. She had never told him because she didn't know how, and because a small, frightened part of her feared he'd see her differently. Not as the capable woman he trusted with high-stakes manuscripts, not as someone who could stand independently, but as someone fragile, someone who had failed at building a life once already. Her phone buzzed again, startling her. She wiped her face quickly and reached for it. A new message lit the screen. Grant, have you had a chance to review Chapter 12? Her chest tightened not with fear this time, but with something gentler, something she didn't want to name. She read the message twice, as if the words hid meaning she wasn't ready to face. She typed, "Yes, working on it now." Her thumb hovered above the send button. She erased the message. She typed again, "I'm fine, just catching up on things." She erased that too. For a moment, she considered telling him something real, something true. "I got an email from my ex. It rattled me." Or, "I'm still figuring out how to be someone new." Or maybe even 5 years ago. "I ran because I didn't know how to let anyone in without losing myself again." Her fingers trembled as she typed the beginning of a sentence. "Tonight has been hard." She stopped. The words blurred. Her throat tightened around something unsaid. She deleted the line, one letter at a time, until the message box was empty again. Then she finally typed, "I'm reviewing the chapter. I'll have notes ready in the morning." This time, she hit send. She set the phone down beside her cold cup of tea. Her kitchen, usually a comforting space, felt unfamiliar tonight, as if the walls remembered more than she wanted to. She rested her forehead in her hands, breathing slowly, trying to steady herself. Outside, a car door slammed, somewhere in the building. A neighbor laughed. Life went on around her, indifferent to the truth she still couldn't face. She closed her eyes. How long could she keep hiding this part of herself? And what would happen when the past she'd buried finally demanded to be told? They had avoided real conversation for weeks until the author insisted they both fly to Seattle. Nora read the email twice that morning, sitting at her desk long before most people arrived. The office was still dim, the early winter sky outside tinting everything a faint blue. She traced the edge of the printed itinerary, feeling the familiar tightening just beneath her ribs. A trip meant proximity. Hours in transit, shared space. Too little room for the distance she'd been trying to maintain. When Grant appeared in her doorway, she already knew what he would say. "We'll leave tomorrow morning," he told her. His tone was even businesslike, but his eyes lingered on her a second too long. "We should be back in 2 days." She nodded, pretending this didn't unsettle her. "All right." He hesitated, as if weighing something, then simply said, "Get some rest tonight." The flight the next morning stretched across the long gray sky. Nora took the window seat, more out of habit than preference. She liked watching the world shrink below her. It reminded her she wasn't trapped anywhere. Not really. Grant took the aisle, his briefcase tucked neatly beneath the seat. His posture relaxed in a way that suggested he had done this hundreds of times. Their elbows were inches apart, close enough she could feel the warmth of him through her sweater. For the first hour, they kept to small talk. Traffic leaving the city, the forecast in Seattle, the strange satisfaction of reading the same sentence 3 times until it finally clicked. It was awkward at first, careful, tentative, but not cold. The kind of conversation people have when they are trying not to stir something deeper. Eventually, the cabin lights dimmed. The passengers around them drifted into sleep, screens flickering faint blue against faces softened by rest. The quiet settled in layers. Grant shifted slightly toward her. "I didn't get a chance to ask." "Are you doing all right?" His voice was low, almost swallowed by the soft hum of the engines. She hesitated. "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." Heat rose in her cheeks. She kept her gaze fixed on the wing outside, where the metal glinted faintly. "It's been a busy month," she said, "and the project is demanding." "That's not what I meant either." The honesty in his tone nudged against something tender inside her. She turned to meet his eyes. They were steady, warm, and far too perceptive. He took a quiet breath. "I meant you. Are you all right?" She looked away again. "I'm managing." Silence settled again, but this one felt softer. Not avoidance, simply space. Grant leaned his head back, watching the ceiling as if searching for the right words. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a calm sorrow. "For a long time, I wondered if I imagined things the night in Boston. Nora's stomach tightened. You didn't imagine it. Then why did you leave her breath stalled? The question she'd feared. The question she'd evaded for 5 years. She opened her mouth, closed it again, feeling the weight of the truth pressing up against the inside of her throat. I wasn't myself then, she whispered. I was coming out of something difficult. He waited, giving her the silence she might fill, but she didn't. I wish you'd told me, he said. I didn't know how. Her voice frayed around the edges. I didn't want you to see me as... She stopped. The word broke and hovered, unspoken, too raw to release into the small space between them. Grant studied her profile. She could feel his gaze even without turning. Everyone comes from something, he said quietly. No one gets to this age clean. A soft laugh escaped her, unintentional and full of exhaustion. That's one way to put it. He smiled faintly. You're not alone in carrying baggage. For a moment, the warmth between them threatened to pull her closer than she was ready for. She folded her hands in her lap, grounding herself with the small motion. So, he said, voice gentle, do I get to know what happened, or do I have to keep guessing? She looked down at her fingers, the half moons her nails left against her palms. Someday, she said, I just need to find the right way. He nodded once, not disappointed, not impatient, simply accepting. Their conversation drifted after that, stories about authors they had worked with, the strange comfort of middle age, the ways life could surprise you long after you thought you'd stopped expecting anything new. It felt natural, warm, too easy. When the turbulence hit, it came without warning. The plane jolted sharply, dipping for half a second before lifting again. Nora gasped and gripped the armrest, her breath catching. She hated this part always had. The loss of control, the sudden vulnerability. Another shudder rolled through the cabin. Before she realized what was happening, Grant's hand covered hers, firm and steady. His thumb brushed lightly against her knuckles, absent-minded or intentional. She couldn't tell, but the touch sent a ripple through her, sharp and familiar, as if no time had passed at all. She didn't pull away. She couldn't. The turbulence eased gradually. The plane steadied, but Grant's hand remained where it was, warm against hers. Neither of them moved. Neither spoke. Finally, he exhaled slowly, still afraid of flying, still pretending I'm not. She murmured. His hand tightened briefly, a quiet reassurance. You don't have to pretend with me. The words settled deep, deeper than she was prepared for. She withdrew her hand gently, not abruptly, but enough to remind herself of the line she had been trying to keep. They sat in silence again, but it wasn't the cold, careful silence from before. It was something else, something like memory, something like possibility. Nora looked out the window. The clouds stretched beneath them in quiet white waves, soft as untouched snow. Why did touch still feel like a memory she hadn't allowed herself to revisit? And what would she do with it now? When everything between them was already too tangled to name, Grant opened her forgotten folder and found the one thing he never expected. He hadn't meant to invade her space. He'd only returned to the conference table in their Seattle hotel to double-check tomorrow's agenda. Nora had left in a hurry after their meeting with the author, saying she needed fresh air. Her folder sat there among the empty water bottles and forgotten pens. The corner of it slightly bent as if she'd been gripping it too tightly. He reached for it with the intention of dropping it by her door, but as he lifted it, something slipped out, a small, worn envelope, its edges softened by time. It landed face up on the carpet, and there, written in her handwriting, was his name. He froze. Nora hadn't written him anything recently. There was no reason for her to, which meant this, whatever this was, belonged to the past. Grant stood very still, the envelope between his fingers. The room felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed into his ears. His throat tightened. He should have put it back. He knew that. He should have left it alone, closed the folder, walked away. But he didn't. He sat on the edge of the bed, the hotel lamp casting a warm cone of light across the blankets and catching the faint tremble in his hands. His name stared back at him in looping ink. For 5 years, he had imagined explanations, closure, even excuses he told himself not to believe. But he had never, not once, imagined a letter. He slid his thumb under the flap and opened it. The paper inside was slightly yellowed at the creases. When he unfolded it, her handwriting swept across the page in soft, uneven lines. He began to read. "I don't know how to say this out loud, so I'm writing it instead. Tonight meant more to me than I can explain. You were gentle in a way I forgot people could be. You saw me without asking anything of me, and that scared me." Grant's chest tightened. "I've spent years feeling small. I don't know how to be with someone who makes me feel seen. I don't know how to trust that I won't disappear again inside someone else's life. You were kind, and I didn't know how to stay without falling apart. So I'm leaving before I ruin whatever this could be." His breath shook on the exhale. "Please don't think it was you. It wasn't. You were the one right thing in a long season of wrong. I just wasn't ready. I'm sorry. More than you know." He let the page fall to his lap. The words blurred. He blinked hard, but the ache stayed. So, that was the truth she never spoke. Fear, hurt. A past she had never trusted him with. For a moment, he didn't feel anger, only grief. The old kind he had buried because he believed she had simply walked away without second thought. But, as the seconds passed, another feeling cut through a sharp sting of betrayal. She had written this. She had tried to explain. She had cared enough to put her heart on a page, but she never gave it to him. She let him wonder for years, let him blame himself, let him believe she didn't feel anything at all. Why hadn't she told him? He pressed the heel of his hand to his forehead, trying to breathe through the sudden storm inside him. The envelope lay beside him, fragile and accusing, her truth too late and too hidden. A knock at the door of his own room would have startled him, less than the thought that came next. He needed to hear her say this. Out loud. Grant stood abruptly, folding the letter with a care that contrasted with the rush of his movements. He slid it back into the envelope, tucked it into his pocket, and stepped into the hallway. His footsteps were firm, echoing off the carpeted corridor as he walked toward her room. By the time he reached her door, his breath was steady, but his pulse wasn't. He lifted his hand and knocked. He expected she might not answer. Maybe she had gone for a long walk. Maybe she had headphones in. Maybe she'd look through the peephole and decide she wasn't ready. But the door opened almost immediately. Nora stood there in pajama pants and a soft sweater, her hair pulled into a loose tie that made her look younger, unguarded. She blinked at him in surprise. "Grant." Her voice was small, like someone pulled out of a quiet thought. "Is everything we need to talk?" he said. His tone wasn't raised, but the strain in it was unmistakable. Her posture shifted, shoulders tensing. "All right," she said, stepping back to let him in. He closed the door behind him, the soft click sounding much louder in the silence. He stood in the center of the room, unsure where to begin. She waited, arms crossed lightly, more protective than defensive. His hand moved to his pocket almost against his will. He pulled out the envelope. Her breath caught. The color drained from her face. "Nora," he said, voice rougher than he intended. "Why was this in your folder?" She stared at it, unable to speak. "You wrote this," he continued, "5 years ago?" A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. She didn't reach up to wipe it away. "I wasn't supposed to see it, was I?" he said. Her throat worked as she tried to find her voice. "No," she whispered. I never meant for you to." Grant's jaw tightened. He held the letter with both tenderness and hurt, as if unsure whether it comforted him or wounded him more. "Why didn't you give it to me?" he asked. "Why let me think you didn't care at all?" Nora pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes shining. "I was terrified and ashamed. I didn't think you would understand. Understand what," his voice cracked quiet but sharp. "That you mattered, that I cared. That one night wasn't nothing to me." Her breath hitched into a sob she tried to swallow. "I didn't know how to stay," she whispered. "Not then." He stood very still. Silence closed around them, heavy and full. Grant drew a slow breath. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, shaken in a way she had never heard before. "Nora, what exactly are you still afraid of?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. The truth trembled inside her, unsteady and unfinished. And he waited hurt, uncertain, and holding the letter that had changed everything. Nora opened the door with swollen eyes, and for the first time, she didn't try to hide them. Grant stood in the hallway, still holding the envelope in his hand, the paper inside it, carrying words she'd never meant for him to see. She stepped back silently, letting him enter, her breath unsteady as she closed the door behind them. The room felt too small for everything between them. A single bedside lamp cast a warm circle of light, leaving the far corners in soft shadow. Grant stood near the desk, shoulders drawn but not closed. Nora moved to the edge of the bed, twisting the sleeve of her sweater between her fingers. She looked as though she had been holding her breath for years. "I didn't think you'd ever see that," she whispered. He lifted the envelope slightly. "You kept it? I couldn't throw it away." Her voice trembled, even as she fought to steady it. He waited silent, patient, hurting but willing to listen. Nora took a long breath, the kind that scraped on its way out. "You deserve the truth," she said. "I should have told you years ago." She sank onto the foot of the bed, staring at her hands. "My marriage, it didn't end because we fought or because something dramatic happened. It ended because I disappeared in it. Slowly, quietly." Her throat tightened. He wasn't cruel. He just stopped seeing me. I'd talk, and he'd talk over me. I'd ask for help, and he'd forget. Birthdays, anniversaries, promises. She swallowed hard. After a while, I stopped believing my feelings mattered at all. Grant's posture softened, just slightly, but he didn't speak. "And when I finally left," she continued, "I was half a person. I kept telling myself I'd get better, that I'd feel whole again, but I didn't. I just learned how to function." She lifted her eyes, meeting his. "By the time I met you in Boston, I didn't trust myself to want anything." Grant's jaw tensed, but his eyes were steady. "The night we spent together," she said, voice barely above a breath, "was the first time I'd felt safe in years. The first time I laughed without thinking about whether it was too loud or too much. You were gentle. You were kind." Her vision blurred. She blinked hard, and that terrified me. She whispered. He stepped closer, only a foot or two away now. "So you ran?" "I ran," she said, nodding, "because I thought if I stayed, I'd fall apart. And I didn't want you to see that. I didn't want you to see how damaged I felt." She wiped at her cheek with the back of her hand. "I wrote the letter. I meant every word. I walked to your door that morning, envelope in hand, and I just froze. I couldn't knock. I didn't believe you'd want someone who was still picking up the pieces of herself." Grant's breath left him in a slow, pained exhale. The letter, still in his hand, crinkled softly. "You should have given me the chance to decide," he said. The words were quiet, gentle, but they hit her like a blow. Nora's breath broke. "I know," she said, voice cracking. "I know, and I'm sorry. I was ashamed, and I was afraid that once you knew how broken I felt, you'd walk away anyway. I waited," he said, not accusing, just honest, longer than I should have. Her shoulders curled inward. "I didn't know, and I didn't know what you were carrying," he said. "I thought you left because I meant nothing. You meant too much," she whispered. The silence that followed was deep, almost reverent. The lamp between them cast their shadows in opposite directions, two people separated by a narrow strip of light that felt like a dividing line between the past and the present. Grant sat slowly in the chair across from her, elbows on his knees, the envelope resting between his fingers. "I'm not angry you were hurting," he said. "I'm angry you didn't trust me enough to tell me." Nora nodded, tears slipping freely now. "I didn't trust anyone. Not then." And now he asked, voice quieter. She tried to answer, but the truth tangled in her throat. She pressed a hand against her chest as if steadying something the fragile inside. "I'm trying," she whispered. "I don't know if I'm doing it well, but I'm trying." Grant leaned back slightly, searching her face, reading the shadows beneath her eyes, the tremble in her hands. "I don't want you to tell me everything tonight," he said, "but I need to know one thing." She lifted her gaze. "Are you still running?" he asked. "Or are you here?" Her breath faltered. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Her chest rose and fell, the truth pushing against her but not yet breaking free. Grant didn't push. He simply waited, the letter between them like a fragile bridge. Nora stared at the envelope, her own handwriting, the piece of her heart she had tried to hide from him, now exposed under the soft glow of the bedside lamp. Was honesty enough to undo 5 years of silence? She didn't know. But she felt the weight of the answer gathering, trembling, waiting for a moment she wasn't sure she was brave enough to step into. He had waited 5 years for this answers, closure, maybe forgiveness. The room felt too still after her last words, as if the air itself hesitated. Grant stood there holding the envelope again, smoothing its worn edges with his thumb. Nora watched him from the bed, her breathing unsteady, her eyes swollen, but finally open in a way he hadn't seen since Boston. He drew a long breath, then sat across from her. His hands rested on his knees, tense but steadying themselves, as if for something heavy. "I searched for you," he said quietly. Nora blinked. "What?" He nodded once, eyes fixed on the floor before lifting them slowly to hers. "After you left that morning, I looked for you. I called the hotel. I checked with the conference organizers. I even asked the front desk if someone had seen you leave." He swallowed. "They said you checked out at dawn." She pressed a hand to her mouth, a soft gasp escaping. "Grant, I wasn't trying to chase you," he said, voice tight. "I just needed to know you were okay. And when I couldn't find you, I told myself maybe it wasn't meant to be." His jaw flexed. But that didn't stop me from wondering. Nora's eyes filled again, tears rising too fast to blink away. He leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "You were the first person I trusted after my own divorce." That startled her. "I didn't know you were divorced then." "You didn't ask," he said, not accusing, just stating a fact. "And I didn't want to put my baggage on your shoulders. But yes, it had been a long marriage, a lonely one near the end." His gaze drifted to the lamp, its glow softening the angles of his face. "I wasn't looking for anything serious. I wasn't ready. But you." He paused, the words catching in his throat. "You reminded me I could feel something again," he said finally. "Something real." A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "And then, you were gone," he said. His voice didn't rise, but the pain beneath it was unmistakable. "Without a word, without a reason, without letting me ask why." He looked away, his breath unsteady. "Your silence. It hurt more than the marriage I ended." She broke at that, the kind of break that wasn't loud but deep. Her shoulders folded inward, and her hand trembled as she pressed it against her chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." He looked at her then, really looked at the hurt, the effort, the woman he had once seen laughing under the Boston snow, now trying to piece herself together in front of him. When she started to cry, quiet, aching tears, she tried to choke back. He stood and crossed the small space between them. He sat beside her on the bed, not touching her at first, simply being close enough to steady her breathing. Her body trembled. "I didn't mean to destroy anything," she said. "I just didn't know how to hold something good." He reached out gently, resting a hand on her back. The moment he touched her, she collapsed into him, the dam breaking in full. She pressed her forehead against his chest, her hands gripping the fabric of his shirt as if anchoring herself. Grant wrapped his arms around her slowly, as though testing whether she would flinch. When she didn't, he held her tighter, not possessively, not with expectation, but with the kind of steadiness two adults offer each other when they have both run out of armor. Rain began tapping softly against the hotel window, a quiet rhythm that filled the room like a heartbeat. Nora's tears soaked into his shirt, her breath uneven as she let out the grief she had carried alone for too long. Grant's chin rested lightly atop her head, his own eyes closing as he held her. "This isn't about going back," he murmured, voice low. "This is about finally telling the truth." She nodded against him. For a long stretch of minutes, they stayed like that, two people with their histories pressed between them, neither trying to fix the other, just sharing the weight. When her sobs softened into slow breaths, he loosened his hold but didn't move away. She leaned back slightly, enough to see him clearly. His eyes were red at the edges, but steady. "I don't know what happens next," she said. "Neither do I," he admitted. She glanced down at the envelope still resting on the bedside table. "I didn't mean for you to find it. I know." He hesitated, then added, "But I'm glad I did." She inhaled shakily, absorbing that. Grant looked toward the window, the rain streaking down in glistening lines. "I don't know if I can trust this," he said softly. "Not yet, but I'm willing to try. If you are." Nora felt something shift inside her, small, fragile, hopeful, and frightened all at once. "I want to try," she whispered. "I just don't want to hurt you again." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. Their palms fit together in a way that felt familiar and new at the same time. They sat like that for a long while, side by side, the rain filling the silence with its steady murmuring. Neither moved to lie down. Neither tried to make the moment something it wasn't. Exhaustion settled over them gently, the weight of emotional truth pulling them toward stillness. Eventually, somewhere between midnight and dawn, Nora leaned her head against his shoulder. Grant rested his cheek lightly against her hair. They fell asleep sitting up, hands entwined, bodies touching only enough to say, "We're here," not enough to promise anything more. Not lovers, not strangers, just two people who had finally stopped pretending they weren't hurting. And when morning came, another question waited quietly in the wings. What would happen when they returned to Chicago? The flight home was quiet, but not cold. Something had shifted. Nora felt it in the way Grant glanced at her during takeoff, not to check on her, but simply to acknowledge she was there. She felt it again when their shoulders brushed as they reached for the same overhead bin, and neither pulled away as quickly as before. It was a quietness that didn't sting anymore, a quietness that held room for something new. Chicago greeted them with a soft gray sky, the kind that settled low over the skyline like a blanket. As they stepped through O'Hare, the crowds moved around them, the hum of rolling luggage and scattered announcements filling the background. Grant walked beside her, not leading, not lagging, just matching her pace with an attentiveness she didn't know how to categorize anymore. At the office the next morning, the world looked normal on the surface. Emails waited, manuscripts piled, deadlines returned with their steady thrum. But the air between her and Grant felt lighter, like someone had cracked open a window neither of them realized was shut. Their first interaction happened over something small, a missing contract draft. Nora reached for a file on the conference table just as Grant stepped in to grab another. Their hands touched briefly, the brush soft and warm. He froze for just a second before offering a faint smile, not the guarded one she'd grown used to. Something easier, something private. By noon, they found themselves in the office cafe, the one tucked near the large windows with a view of the river. It wasn't planned. Nora had gone in for coffee. Grant had followed a minute later. He didn't hover. He simply selected his cup, glanced her way, and nodded toward an empty table. She surprised herself by agreeing. 2 steaming coffee cups sat between them, their curls of steam drifting up like small ghosts of conversations they hadn't had yet. Nora wrapped her hands around her mug, letting the heat seep into her fingers. Grant sat relaxed, elbows resting on the table, his expression thoughtful. "My father's slowing down," he said after a moment. "He turned 82 last month." Nora looked up, taken aback by the sudden intimacy of the topic. "How's he doing?" Grant's gaze softened. "He's proud, stubborn, still insists on shoveling snow himself. He shook his head with a quiet laugh. But he's lonely. My mother passed years ago, and he still talks to her chair at the dinner table. The image pierced her gently, the empty chair, the loyalty of habit, the ache of growing old without the person who anchored your memories. That must be hard, she said. It is, he admitted. But I'm trying to be there more. He picked up his cup, then lowered it again without taking a sip. The trip to Seattle made me realize how easily time slips past without giving you a second chance to say the things you mean. Her chest tightened at that, knowing it wasn't just about his father. The warmth between them was quiet but present, like a lamp left on in the next room. Nora felt a weight inside her, one she had carried for years, lift just a little. She didn't know if it was forgiveness or relief, or something too new to name. Still, every time she thought of leaning toward it, fear tugged her back. Fear of repeating the same patterns. Fear of hurting him. Fear of misreading the softness in his voice and stepping too close too soon. Grant seemed to sense her hesitation without prying. He kept the conversation gentle books they were excited to publish, small frustrations with travel, the comfort of routines in middle age, nothing forced, nothing heavy, just two people rediscovering the rhythm of talking. Over the next few days, the shift continued subtle but steady. Their interactions at work lost their rough edges. When Nora reviewed a proposal, she would glance up and catch Grant observing her with a small, almost fond curiosity. When he spoke in meetings, his tone with her was warm, precise, respectful in ways that went beyond professionalism. But he didn't push. Every gesture he made told her the same thing: I'm here, but I won't move closer unless you want me to. Some afternoons she felt a rush of hope, like the memory of a winter walk in Boston pulling her forward. Other days she found herself twisting a pen cap between her fingers, wondering if she could really trust herself now, if the woman she had become was steady enough to hold something tender without dropping it. One night, after a long meeting, they walked out of the building together. The sky was turning that soft rose gold that Chicago sometimes managed on clear evenings. Grant slowed his steps until they were side by side. I'm glad Seattle happened, he said softly. She looked at him, surprised by how genuine it felt. Me too. They paused at the corner where their paths split, his parking garage to the left, her bus stop to the right. For a moment, neither moved. He cleared his throat, not nervously, just thoughtfully. Nora, may I ask you something? She felt her pulse pick up. Of course. His eyes met hers, steady and unhurried, the way someone looks when they've made peace with waiting. Would you like to have dinner sometime? He hesitated, then added quietly, off the record? Her breath caught not because she hadn't expected the moment to come, but because of the gentleness in how he asked. No pressure, no assumptions, just an invitation held out carefully, like a fragile object he didn't want to mishandle. She looked down, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. Dinner meant stepping forward. Stepping forward meant opening old doors. And opening old doors meant risking the past repeating itself. But doing nothing meant losing whatever fragile warmth had begun to grow between them. She lifted her gaze slowly, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. She started. The streetlight flickered on above them, casting a soft gold along his face. Waiting. Was she ready for something real? The answer hovered at the edge of her breath, but she wasn't sure she could say it yet. Nora sat across from him in the soft glow of a small Italian restaurant, feeling 30 and 40 at the same time. Candlelight flickered between them, casting ripples of gold along the rim of their wine glasses. Outside, the late evening traffic hummed along the river, but inside, everything felt strangely still, like the world had stepped a few inches back to give them room. She hadn't planned to say yes to dinner. Even when she'd opened her mouth at the corner after work, she expected her voice to fail her. It didn't. And now, sitting here with Grant across the table, she felt that familiar, unsettling warmth rising in her chest, the same warmth she'd tried so hard to silence in Boston. Grant looked relaxed, almost. His shoulders carried that faint stiffness she recognized from long days at the office. But his eyes held something different tonight. Not guarded, not wounded, just quietly hopeful. The way a man looks when he's not sure whether he should let his heart get ahead of him. "You picked a beautiful place," she said, letting her fingers brush the edge of her menu to keep them from shaking. He smiled, soft around the edges. "I used to come here with authors. They have a way of convincing you that life-changing conversations only happen over homemade pasta. That's oddly true," she said, laughing quietly. It surprised her how natural it sounded. As the waiter poured wine, Nora studied the room. The wooden beams, the faded photographs on the walls, the warm amber lights, everything felt intimate without being intimidating. She needed that. A place that allowed deep breaths. They started with simple conversation, stories from work, old travel mishaps, a shared fondness for secondhand bookstores. The more they talked, the more Nora felt her guard loosen, like each story untied one small knot inside her. Then Grant leaned back slightly, resting his forearm on the table. "You seem lighter lately," he said. She looked down at her napkin. "Maybe I'm trying to be... Trying counts," he replied. "Trying is everything at our age." His tone wasn't self-pitying, just honest. And the honesty hit her harder than she expected. She had spent years pretending she didn't feel alone. Hearing him say it out loud made her want to release something she hadn't dared name. They ordered dinner, pesto gnocchi for her, roasted chicken for him. The plates came steaming, filling the table with warm, comforting scents. When she took her first bite, she let out a small sigh she didn't mean to let slip. Grant chuckled. "Good." She nodded, embarrassed at how emotional a dish of pasta made her. Very... Conversation deepened the way good meals often made possible. She told him, in small pieces, about thinking of buying a little home, not big, just hers. A porch for quiet evenings. A kitchen she didn't have to share with anyone who criticized every spice she used. Maybe even a garden. "I want roots," she admitted, her voice soft. "I've spent so many years living like I was waiting for the next storm. I want a place where quiet doesn't feel like punishment." Grant listened without interrupting. His expression held something tender, something proud even. "You deserve that," he said, "more than you know." She looked at him, surprised by the certainty in his tone. "You barely knew me back then." "I knew enough," he said quietly. "I knew you were carrying more than you said." Her throat tightened. She looked away, pretending to adjust her fork, but she knew he saw the flicker in her eyes. He always noticed small things. Maybe that was why being near him made her feel both safe and exposed. He talked then about leadership, about the loneliness of being the person people look to for answers. "Everyone assumes you're fine," he said. "You become a role instead of a person." It struck her that despite the success, the composure, the authority he carried at work, there was a tenderness under it all, a human longing she had sensed years ago, walking with him under Boston street lamps. She reached for her wine glass, and he did the same. Their hands brushed. This time, neither pulled away. The touch lingered, not dramatic, not impulsive, just quiet recognition. A shared breath. A reminder of the night that had never left either of them. She felt her pulse flutter, not the frantic kind, but the deep, warm kind that made her wonder if all the fear she'd carried had simply been waiting for this steadiness. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The moment said enough. They finished dinner slowly, savoring each bite. When the plates were cleared, neither reached for their coats. They simply sat, the candle burning low, the room thinning out around them. Time stretched in that gentle way it sometimes does when two people finally stop pretending they don't care. But with warmth came fear. What if this was nostalgia? What if their connection survived only in dim restaurants and old memories? What if stepping forward meant losing the fragile piece she'd just begun to rebuild? Grant's gaze softened as he watched her wrestle with something he couldn't name. "Nora," he said quietly, "I don't want to rush anything. He paused, searching for the right words. "I want to know you again. If you'll let me, Her breath trembled. Wanting him back felt easy too easy. Trusting herself not to break under the weight of it, that was harder. She picked up her napkin, twisting it unconsciously, then set it down again. "I don't know what I'm ready for," she whispered. "That's all right," he said. "We can start with tonight." The simplicity of the offer almost undid her. When they stood to leave, he helped her with her coat. His hand brushed her shoulder, steady and warm. Outside. The night air wrapped around them, cool and quiet, the distant sound of traffic echoing along the river. They walked slowly toward the corner where their paths split. At the crosswalk, they paused under the glow of a street lamp. The light softened the lines on his face, making him look both older and younger than she remembered. He gave her a small, almost shy smile. "Thank you for tonight." She swallowed. "Thank you." She took one step back, then another, her heart thudding with something uncertain and sweet. Was this the beginning, or just nostalgia dressed in candlelight? The question followed her all the way home. The call came at 6:12 a.m., sharp, insistent, cutting through the quiet of Nora's small apartment like something tearing fabric. She startled awake, heart thudding, reaching for her phone with a trembling hand. It wasn't her name on the screen. It was the office line. She answered, still groggy, Nora Carter. The voice on the other end sounded strained, too formal for this hour. "There's a situation. You need to come in." She didn't ask questions. The tone said enough. By the time she stepped into the building, the sun was barely up, and the lobby lights cast long, pale shadows on the marble floor. The air felt wrong, too quiet, too still, like the building itself was holding its breath. Upstairs, she saw board members gathered in tight clusters, whispering. A few glanced her way and then looked quickly elsewhere. And in the middle of it all, standing rigid with a folder in his hand, was Grant. He looked older this morning, not because of age, but because of weight that hadn't been there yesterday. His usually steady expression was strained, jaw tight, eyes shadowed with something she had seen before, the fear of being one step away from losing everything. "What happened?" she asked gently as she approached him. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he handed her a report too many zeros, too many red flags, a financial discrepancy buried in last quarter's numbers, now discovered by a journalist who was already contacting the press. Mismanagement, leadership failure, words that, if printed, could end a career. "It's not as bad as it looks," Grant said quietly, though his voice lacked certainty. "But the board's panicking. They're questioning everything." She watched him rub his forehead, the way someone does when exhaustion has already claimed more space than sleep. For a moment she wanted to reach out, touch his arm, steady him, but they were surrounded by eyes. He stood straight, trying to look unshaken. "Let me help," she said. "You don't have to get involved in this," he replied. "I know," she said softly, "but I'm here." Something flickered in his expression. Relief, gratitude, maybe even fear that she would walk away instead. But he nodded. The hours blurred after that. Meetings, phone calls, coordinating documents, editing statements, preparing internal memos that tried to minimize the damage without lying. Grant worked with a quiet ferocity, pacing between the conference table and the whiteboard, hands tight around markers and papers. Nora stayed beside him, not hovering, not taking over, just taking on what he couldn't carry alone. As the day slipped into evening, others left the building. The office lights dimmed automatically, casting a muted, late-night glow. Outside the windows, the city lights shimmered across the river, reflecting off the glass walls like scattered stars. Around midnight, Grant sat heavily at the table, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, staring at another stack of financial records. His tie was loosened, shirt wrinkled, hair pushed back by tired hands. He wasn't broken, but he was closer than she'd ever seen him. Nora watched him for a moment before crossing the room. She slipped off her coat and draped it gently over his shoulders. The gesture made him lift his head slowly, as though the warmth startled him. "You should go home," he murmured, though he didn't shrug the coat off. This isn't your burden. She took the chair beside him, close enough that their arms nearly touched. It is, if you're carrying it alone. He shook his head, frustrated. If this goes wrong, everything I've built, everything I've tried to rebuild. His voice trailed off. I've been here before. Nora. Losing things I thought were solid. Her chest tightened. She knew exactly what he meant. Divorce stripped more than love. It stripped certainty, security, the illusion that life had a map. She knew the ache of trying again, of wondering if the next step forward would only lead to a deeper fall. He looked up at her then, really looked, as though he needed something more than her help, something steadier, something human. I keep thinking, he said softly, that maybe I'm not meant to hold anything together. She felt a sharp ache behind her ribs. That's not true. He exhaled shakily, leaning back in the chair. The room felt too quiet, the kind of silence that carried everything unsaid. What if the board replaces me? He asked. What if this is it? His fingers clenched around the armrest. What if I lose everything all over again? You won't, she said. You're not alone this time. As soon as the words left her mouth, something inside him seemed to break just a little, just enough. He covered his face with his hands for a moment, then lowered them slowly, eyes glistening with a pain he rarely let show. When he spoke again, his voice was rougher, the polish stripped away. Please don't leave me this time. The sentence hit her with the force of a memory she'd spent years trying to outrun. The hotel hallway, his unread letter, his searching for her afterward, his disappointment in that first meeting. He wasn't talking about the company. He wasn't talking about the board. He was talking about them. Nora, he whispered, I'm not asking you for promises. I'm just asking you not to disappear. Her throat tightened, her breath catching in a mix of fear and longing. She wanted to reach for his hand, to tell him yes. She was here. She wasn't running. But the old fear tugged at her, reminding her of the woman who once believed she wasn't enough to stay. She looked at him, really looked at the tired lines on his face, the quiet desperation in his eyes, the strength beneath the vulnerability. Could she stay this time? Could she choose him? Choose them, without losing herself? The question echoed inside her as she sat there in the dim room, his coat still warm on his shoulders, the city lights flickering like distant signals outside the window. Was she ready to stay? Not just tonight, but for real. Nora didn't hesitate this time. She reached for his hand first. It happened in the hallway outside the boardroom, moments after the final numbers came through and the company stabilized. Relief had washed over the entire floor. People were shaking hands, exhaling, returning to their offices with that sluggish post-crisis exhaustion. But Grant stayed still, shoulders lowered, eyes closed for a long second, as though he was trying to let the calm settle inside him. She approached quietly, the morning light filtering through the tall windows, casting soft gold across the carpet. His tie was loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled halfway up. He looked worn, human, and strangely peaceful. When she touched his hand, he opened his eyes. For the first time since the crisis began, they held nothing but gratitude. You stayed, he said quietly. I did, she replied. And I will, if you'll let me. A breath slipped from him, part relief, part disbelief, part something softer that looked almost like hope. He squeezed her hand, once, gently, as if testing whether the moment was real. Over the next week, the storm gradually lifted. Reports were corrected. Statements were released. The journalist who had stirred the trouble acknowledged the update, and slowly, the tension that had been choking the office loosened like a tightened knot being unwound. Grant spent hours with the board, not defending himself this time, but redirecting the future of the company. One evening, after a long meeting, he found Nora in the hallway reviewing a manuscript. He leaned against the wall, watching her flip through pages with that familiar concentration she carried, like a second skin. I'm thinking about stepping back, he said quietly. She turned, startled. from the CEO role. He nodded. I've been doing this a long time. And somewhere along the way, I stopped noticing how much it was taking from me. She closed the folder, giving him her full attention. What would you do instead? Something slower, he said. Something that feels like a life, not a performance. Maybe consult. Maybe teach. He looked at her then, expression honest and unguarded. Maybe make room for things I haven't allowed myself to want. Her heart gave a small, steady thump. That sounds good, she said softly. Grant pushed off the wall and stepped closer. Not too close, just enough that she felt his presence warm the air between them. But I don't want to make that choice running from a crisis, he said. I want to make it because it's right, because it leads me toward the life I want. She understood, and she admired that carefulness. It mirrored the care she was trying to extend to her own heart. They began seeing each other more often slowly, deliberately. Some days they simply walked together to the cafe downstairs. Other days they met after work for a quiet drink by the river. Nothing rushed, nothing unnamed. On a Saturday afternoon, he invited her to Lake Michigan. The late spring air carried the faint scent of water and blooming trees, and the sky glowed with the warm pinks of an early sunset. They walked along the shoreline, the gravel crunching softly beneath their steps. Nora felt calm in a way she hadn't felt in years, calm without pretending, calm without fear pressing against her ribs. Grant glanced at her, hands tucked into his pockets. "Can I tell you something?" She nodded. "I'm scared," he admitted. "Not of you, just of wanting this too much." She felt that truth settle in her bones. "I'm scared too," she said, "but maybe fear just means we're paying attention." He looked at her then, really looked, his eyes holding a tenderness that softened the lines on his face. They stopped walking, the waves rolling gently behind them. When he reached for her hand, she met him halfway. Their fingers intertwined with an ease that felt like memory and discovery all at once. He took a breath, steady and slow. "Nora," he said quietly, "I don't want a perfect ending. I don't even believe in them anymore." Her heart tightened with something warm. "I want a real one," he continued, voice low, "with you." The sunset cast a soft glow along the water, catching every small ripple like shards of rose-colored glass. Nora felt her throat grow tight, not in fear this time, but in something like gratitude, deep, unexpected, almost overwhelming. She stepped closer, their hands still joined, and lifted her face toward his. Grant hesitated for a fraction of a second, not from doubt, but respect. When he leaned in, the kiss was gentle, hesitant, grown up. The kind of kiss two people share when they know the stakes, know the risks, and choose each other anyway. It wasn't urgent, it wasn't dramatic, it was steady, warm, healing. When they parted, neither spoke. They simply stood together, watching the fading sun stretch its last light across the lake. A breeze swept past them, and she felt him tighten his hand around hers. She looked up and asked, almost in a whisper, "What does a real future look like for us?" The question lingered in the cooling air, full of possibility and uncertainty, waiting for whatever came next. Back home. Nora opened the envelope for the first time. The paper trembled faintly between her fingers, the edges softened by years of being moved from drawer to drawer, always kept but never faced. The late afternoon light drifted through her kitchen window, warm and golden, landing on the table where a cup of tea steamed quietly beside her. She hadn't brewed tea that stayed warm in years, not since the night she cried over this very envelope sitting untouched and accusing beside her. Grant sat across from her, not speaking, letting the moment belong to her. His coat hung over the back of the chair, his posture relaxed but attentive. He looked more like the man she'd walked beside along the Boston streets 5 years ago, and less like the CEO the world had tried to turn him into. She unfolded the letter slowly. The handwriting looked smaller than she remembered, shaky at the edges, as if she'd written every word through a haze of fear. "I was so scared," she whispered, barely breathing the words out as her eyes traced the ink she had once spilled in secret. I didn't even recognize myself when I wrote this." He leaned forward slightly, but didn't interrupt. She felt his presence more than she heard it, a quiet steadiness she'd needed then, but hadn't known how to reach for. "It's strange," she said, voice tightening, reading my own fear like it belongs to someone else now. "What does it say?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then passed him the worn sheet. His fingers brushed hers as he took it, and something calm settled inside her, like a knot loosening. He read in silence. His eyes moved slowly, absorbing each sentence, each apology, each confession she'd hidden from him and from herself. When he finally looked up, there was no judgment in his expression, only a quiet understanding, and something warmer. "That woman," he said softly, "deserved to be cared for, even if she didn't believe it." Nora lowered her gaze, her throat tightening. "I thought if I pretended I didn't want anything, I couldn't be disappointed again." "And did it work?" he asked, not unkindly. "Just real." She shook her head. "It just made me lonely." Grant reached across the table, resting his hand over hers. The warmth there was steady, but not demanding. "You're not alone now," he said, "not unless you choose to be." The words settled between them like a soft echo, not sharp or overwhelming, but anchoring. Outside the window, the sky shifted toward the pale blue of early evening. She breathed in, then out, letting that truth filter through her. "I've been thinking a lot," she said quietly, "about second chances, about the way life isn't just one straight line, how sometimes what you need shows up late, when you finally have enough years behind you to understand it." He smiled not broadly, but with a depth she felt rather than saw. "Love at this age is different," he said, "less about proving something, more about choosing, and choosing well." Nora nodded. "I want to choose better than I used to." "You already are." For a while they sat in silence, the letter resting between them like a bridge connecting past and present. The tea beside her was still warm, fragrant and gentle, not like the cup she'd let grow cold in fear. This one she lifted and sipped, slowly, grounding herself in the moment. She looked at him. "So, what now?" Grant leaned back slightly, considering her with a quiet seriousness. "Now," he said, "we build something real, slowly, honestly, no rushing toward some perfect picture neither of us needs." She took another small sip of tea. "I don't want perfection," she murmured. "I want something that lasts." He hesitated then just long enough for her to sense he was gathering courage. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small piece of stationery from the hotel where they'd stayed in Seattle. He unfolded it, then took the pen lying on the table. "What are you doing?" she asked, though her voice carried no alarm. "Something simple," he said, "something honest." His handwriting was firmer than hers had been years ago, deliberate but not stiff. He wrote only for a moment, then handed the folded paper to her. Nora stared at it. For a beat. She couldn't bring herself to open it. "Grant," he shook his head. "Not a demand, not a promise I expect anything from. Just something I want you to have." She unfolded it slowly. The ink was still wet in a few places. "If you ever doubt yourself again, read this first." Her breath caught. She felt tears form not from sadness, but from the quiet, overwhelming gentleness of it. The note didn't need a grand declaration. It didn't need poetry. It just needed truth. She looked up at him through blurred lashes. "Thank you," she whispered. He stood then, walked around the table, and placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, not pulling her close, not urging anything, just being near, offering warmth she could lean into if she chose. Nora rested her cheek against the back of his hand. The moment was small and ordinary. Two people in a quiet kitchen, a letter lying open, a cup of tea still warm, but she felt something shift inside her, something she hadn't felt with certainty in years. Not fear, not doubt, just beginning. She closed her eyes briefly, holding on to the soft weight of the moment. The future wasn't defined yet. It didn't need to be. Some stories didn't end with fireworks. They ended with a warm note, a steady hand, and the kind of lingering hope that stayed long after the page was turned. She touched the letter one more time, tracing her old handwriting, then his. Their two versions of truth finally sitting side by side, and for the first time, she felt ready to let the past rest. Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it, somewhere between an old fear we finally name and a new hope we dare to reach for. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or clarity. More often, it comes quietly, in the form of a conversation we were once too afraid to have, or a truth we finally speak out loud after years of carrying it alone. Stories like this remind us of something simple but easy to forget. We don't age out of second chances. Life may change us. Yes, it may leave us more cautious, more tender, more guarded, but it also leaves us wiser, softer, better able to see what truly matters. And when a person shows up with patience, with steadiness, with the willingness to stay even when it would be easier to walk away, that's a kind of grace worth holding gently. Maybe love in midlife isn't about starting over. Maybe it's about continuing forward with someone who understands the weight of what came before and chooses you anyway. Wherever you are in your own journey, I hope this leaves a little warmth in your hands and a reminder that it's never too late to begin again. Thank you, truly, for spending a little of your time here with this story tonight. Your presence matters more than you know. It's what keeps these quiet, human moments alive. If you feel this story carried even a small warmth to you, a simple like share or subscribe helps send that kindness a little farther into the world. Wishing you a gentle evening and a heart that feels just a bit lighter.